Now on BBC Radio Berkshire, it's Anne Diamond.
In a couple of moments, we have a real-life Miss Marple for you. The Miss Marple I'm going to be talking to has uncovered a historical and political scandal. We'll be hearing how one of our most famous prime ministers had a secret love child and was secretly writing love letters to his mistress while sending our boys off to war.
BBC Radio Berkshire.
Now I want you to meet a real, intrepid, real-life Miss Marple, trying to discover the truth about a 100-year cover-up that may, if you really take it to its extreme, have unnecessarily cost the lives of thousands of British soldiers. Let me introduce you to author Bobbie Neat. She always had suspicions about the past of her stepfather, Louis Stanley. But what she didn't know was that she was uncovering an explosive political scandal involving the former Prime Minister and first Earl of Oxford, Herbert Asquith, in the rolling countrysides of South Oxfordshire, here in our patch of BBC Radio Berkshire. Bobbie joins me now. Hello there, Bobbie.
Hello.
Hi. Right, we've got our listeners, we don't want to confuse them, so we go back to the sort of years just coming up to the First World War, when Asquith was, I think he was Chancellor or something, and then became Prime Minister, yes?
He became Prime Minister in 1908.
Oh, gosh, was he Prime Minister that early on? Right, I didn't realise it was quite that early on. Right, so he was Prime Minister, and what sort of a character was he?
Well, he was very intelligent. It's always been said that he managed to control the most intelligent cabinet ever. He was married, he had 7 children, he managed to so-called get through his work very quickly. He was meant to be a very good peacetime Prime Minister, but of course during wartime he rather fell apart.
Absolutely, and this is where the sort of things that you've uncovered may well reflect upon that. I gather he was a bit of a lech, wasn't he?
He certainly was.
He had a reputation as a groper. Even Clementine Churchill apparently complained of his habit of peering down the top of ladies' dresses.
Absolutely. Yes, he had a little harem of young ladies, and how this relationship started was that he wanted, when he was 55, to be friends with his elder children's social group. And how it all got covered up was his own daughter, Violet, used to go out with him, and her best friend was the lover in question,
and
Venetia
this is the lady
Stanley.
called Venetia. Yes.
That's right.
And apparently we think that, we know they had a relationship of some sort because he wrote her love letters.
Absolutely, yes. He wrote her over 500 letters. He wrote, as if in the modern email situation, in those days, post arrived almost immediately, and he wrote 5 letters a day in some cases.
And do we now know as fact, something you've been able to uncover, that he often wrote those love letters during cabinet meetings?
Isn't it extraordinary?
So that basically what we're saying is his mind was on something else when he was taking incredibly important decisions.
He even wrote those letters in war cabinet meetings. And there's a wonderful example of this when he says to Venetia, there's a windy argument going on between Winston and the chief of the army, and I better get back to business, when he's writing this letter to her.
Oh, right. So it's just like somebody sort of being on Facebook in the middle of a meeting.
Yes. Quite extraordinary.
Yeah. And those letters have survived. I mean, where are they now?
They're in the Bodleian.
Are they indeed? Gosh, I mean, it's amazing that they survived, isn't it? But you've been able to take that story on a bit more because you think that there was a child as a result of that affair.
I don't think I know.
Tell me how you know.
Well, it's all evidence leads in only one direction. The first thing is how similar my stepfather and Herbert Asquith look. They look like twins. But the real important thing is matching up my home memories with research and basically names and all the things that my stepfather crowed about. He was a big bragger and used to talk about political names when I was a child. For instance, Lord Beaverbrook, the Aga Khan, Bonham Carter, And of course, all those names are connected with Asquith. There's lots of journeys that my stepfather used to take me on. He used to demand that my mother did the driving, and we went to these very strange places. And he was basically looking up his childhood roots.
Yes. Yes, so, but did you ever, you were never able to ask him point blank, were you related?
I didn't even suspect it then. I suspected that he was a very strange individual.
So what do you suspect did happen? Asquith had this relationship with Venetia, and at some point then she will have produced a child. Do we know whether he was involved at all in the upbringing of that child?
No, I'm sure he wasn't. I think he helped Venetia's family choose the adoptive mother. And of course, this is the fascination to me, was how did they choose a woman trustworthy enough to bring up a prime minister's illegitimate child?
Well, we'll ask you that question in a moment. Let's just hang on the edge of that cliff for a few more minutes. I'm talking to author Bobbie Neate. Now, as I was saying, we have uncovered, or at least through author Bobbie Neate, we have uncovered a sort of scandal behind Prime Minister Herbert Asquith, who, whilst he was actually holding cabinet meetings, war cabinet meetings, whilst he was, writing orders and making decisions about sending our boys off to war, he was also, at the same time, at his desk, at the same time, writing love letters to his mistress, Venetia. And Bobbie Neate, author Bobbie Neate, who's with me now, reckons that not only did they send these love letters to each other, and was his mind literally on something else, but that they did spawn a love child. And you believe, don't you, Bobbie, that love child was your stepfather?
I do.
Yeah. Do you have any, could you get any proof? Could you take it any more?
I did try and take some DNA from my stepfather's body, but I understand that, well, I didn't try. I did think about it, but I understand that that's not within the law to do that. But of course, there is the opportunity of getting DNA from one of the living relatives.
Of Asquith?
Yes.
Absolutely. Yes, potentially you could prove or disprove a link there. What does this tell you, though, about what was going on at the time? Because I know you've actually said that it's a bit like, you consider David Cameron now actually holding cabinet meetings about really important things, like, for instance, at the moment, whether or not we get involved militarily in Syria, and at the same time being on his laptop and writing love letters to somebody. It would be like that.
It certainly would. Maybe I could just read out a tiny snippet of one of the letters.
Yes, please.
When I got your letter, I at once postponed my interview with the King until noon, that we might have the hour 10:30 to 11:30 together. I wanted so much at the earliest opportunity to talk to you and get your opinions about today's War Council.
My goodness.
In my view, that says it all.
It really does, doesn't it? Now, look, once you've got that, and I know that you have presented this, you've written about it, how does the establishment react to your saying this, that not only was he having this affair, but he did have a love child?
I've had a nil response, which of course in journalistic terms is the best way for those involved not to get involved. But the best story is when I went to visit Michael Brock, who originally edited the letters.
Now, he's a very famous historian, but also very much a liberal.
He is. He was given the letters by the Bonham Carters, and the Bonham Carters are down the line from the Asquiths. Violet Bonham Carter was Asquith's eldest daughter, the friend of the lover, Venetia. But when I went to see Michael Brock, he was utterly charming, welcomed me into his flat, and I asked him whether there would be any more letters. He answered that he didn't think there were. But then I said, well, what do you think about this relationship? You say in your letter that it wasn't sexual. How do you know about that? And he huffed and puffed and said, well, maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. And then I said, well, what if I said to you that there was a love child? Now, this leading academic changed from being very authoritative on his subject to almost a quivering wreck and asked me to leave. He told me he couldn't answer the question, and that I was to drink up my coffee straight away, and that I was asked to leave. And as I left, obviously we continued to be quite cordial. He said, "I think I have answered the question you came for."
Basically, he did not want you to rewrite the history that is there now.
Yes.
Not comfortable with that at all.
There is a lot of hiding up there, and I believe that I've only found the start of this cover-up. Why be so secretive about a love child 100 years later? Nobody's coming out of the woodwork.
I guess, in those days, it wouldn't have been unusual at all for a man, even in a high-up position, to have affairs and to have love children. The important thing here, though, is that it does very much reflect on the conduct, behaviour, mental health of a man who was Prime Minister at a most incredibly important time.
That's right. He not only relied on this young girl who wasn't the slightest bit interested in politics, on her opinion, on his fellow cabinet meetings. Again, one of the letters is, "How wise. I thought that all you said in your letter today on these subjects, especially in reference to the personal qualities of Winston Churchill. Your intuition never fails you, and there is no colleague whose judgment I trust so much."
How old was she at the time?
In her early 20s.
Oh, goodness. There's nothing as daft as a man who's completely besotted, and by the sound of it, he was.
Yes. And, of course, as Venetia tried to wriggle out of this very intense relationship, the more that Asquith started to dwindle in his self-esteem, he admits that he started to, and he starts to admit that he has suicidal thoughts.
Yes, didn't he write to her, "If there had been a pistol around, I might have shot myself"?
Yes.
And he also added that he would, quote, "struggle with the demands of government if she did not stand by him."
Yes.
What eventually happened to her?
Well, are you asking what happened in 1915 or later on in her life?
Well, either neither or both.
Well, in 1915, she was really struggling. Asquith was completely controlling her life, and she was obviously struggling to get rid of the Prime Minister, who was really going to fall apart if she left him. But, of course, she did actually leave him. She wrote a letter in May 1915, and 4 days later, Asquith agreed to a coalition, having said before there was no way he was ever going to agree to a coalition. And reports say that he was deranged, very depressed, out of himself, and he agreed to that coalition by only speaking to the leader of the opposition and to Lloyd George.
Yes,
quite extraordinary.
Absolutely, and then history changed a lot. Do you think there are any more skeletons rattling around in that closet?
I do. I have no doubt. Was there another child? Who knows what happened during those days of the coalition? The coalition happened in 1915, right in the middle of the war. There is a cover-up here.
Well, go on uncovering. Thanks very much indeed. It's been fascinating to talk to you. Author Bobbie Neate.